Hey everybody, we're going to start the next presentation, and I get the honor of introducing my very good friend Ken Ferber. Ken Ferber is widely recognized as an expert in crisis communications, political advocacy. Over the course of his 35-year career, Ken has led campaigns on a wide variety of subjects, including HIV/AIDS, hate crimes, police reform, global genocide, and of course, wolves and wolf dogs. He is a leading voice in the efforts to bring people with intellectual and developmental disabilities out of the institutions and into the community. Ken has served on local advisory commissions, advised political candidates, and ran advocacy campaigns for the White House, for White House officials, British royalty, and even an African king. Ken has been an amazing friend. He's family to Paula and I, and a massive supporter of Apex. His whole family have taken us in and supported us for a long, long time. So I'm very honored to introduce Ken Ferber.
I got a chair here for me because people who've seen me hike with wolves and roll down the mountain know that my stability is not what it should be. Oh, I need those notes. Thank you. Yeah. I don't know how you follow any of this stuff. I'm not going to talk about wolves. This is really a wonderful thing, and it's been extraordinary to be here. I want to thank Steve and Paula for introducing me to Betsy. And where is Betsy in here? No, we can't talk about her. She's not in here. We'll wait on that one. Can you hear me? Okay. When Steve said we were like family, and I was like, well, as you find out in the presentation, being part of my family is not necessarily a good thing. So we're actually a little bit closer than that. We're going to start then with the first. Where is this? Okay, well, I can see it now. Okay, so why are we here? Well, I'm here because 8.5 years ago, I met Paula, and I thought it was like one of the greatest days of my life. She was my first real interaction with a wolf, and I'm going to use wolf for wolf and wolf dogs just to make it simple. And it was just amazing to be there, and my heart was soaring. And then the next day, I found out she was already married to Steve. And then about a month later, I went up to the ranch and I met Steve. And I went, this is the most incredible guy I've ever seen. And I'm like, this is incredible. And then it occurred to me, he's already married to Paula, so it didn't work out for me in either case. And one of the things that's interesting is I found out last night, Paula and I actually have the same taste in women. So before we get into actually the presentation, where I came from in terms of that's important growing up. My father was a police captain in New York City back in the days before Miranda, civil rights, and all that other stuff. So a real tough mentality of a cop and as a captain. And then he went to law school and became a criminal defense attorney. So when I was 9 years old, the conversation at the dinner table was not as much about what happened at school or whatever else, but to understand, okay, what's the other side of it? What's their side? So I would come home after I was jumped by about 20 kids, and he would say, well, what was their point in jumping you? They probably had a good reason. What did you do? And it got me thinking that growing up, I had to know both sides of every story, and that there always is another side, folks. No matter what we want to believe about animals and wolves, there's always another side. They can be wrong. They usually are. But the point is they have that side. And if you don't understand their side, you really can't advocate as effectively. And that's going to be the whole point here, is to talk about effective advocacy, making it work for you, getting the biggest bang for your buck. What else do I have here? Let's go. It's great when your hand is going to have surgery doing this. Oh, wait, we have to go back there. The guy, the little cute little guy on the right, the one standing, that guy next to him who's sitting, that's actually my great-grandfather. And he really started the advocacy movement in our family 120-something years ago. He was advocating for women's rights and workers' rights and ended up becoming one of the founders of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And so that was what I grew up with. And can anybody guess what his first name was? Wolf. That's my great-grandfather, Wolf Yutkoff. So it was in that family that, we had this. So we're going to talk about a number of things today. The thing I want to get into here is we can't go through everything in great detail. Virtually every subject here can be its own breakout, but we're going to try and give you an overview of what it is, and the reason I gave you the handout is I don't want you focusing on taking pictures of the screen or writing notes. You have to look at me. That's the price you pay for coming here. And so you should leave here with at least a sense of what is involved in creating a more effective way of doing things. I'm having notes here because I got to tell you, I finished this a couple weeks ago, but listening to everybody speak it's been extraordinary. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, well, we have an interesting point of view, don't we, when we're dealing with wolves and our situation. I mean, we have challenges that nobody else has. Nobody looks at bald eagles and says, oh, they've been demonized in movies. As little as 25 years ago, Disney put out Beauty and the Beast, and the wolves were the enemy. And that is just something we have to deal with and we have to overcome. I'm going to need, can I take this off and go down? I really can't see a lot of this stuff. I thought I could read this backwards, but I can't. Okay, so, that's fine. Well, now it's okay. Well, when I stumble, you'll see. The second one, if I had 2 years and somebody was funding me for 2 years, I would do nothing but eradicate the term lone wolf when it comes to criminals and terrorists. It is so offensive, and I've dealt with the media my whole life. You better get used to this, folks. It doesn't stop. It's part of the show. But here's the thing I want to talk about most is number 7. And it's a real problem that people here have, and I don't think you recognize it. And that is, how many animal organizations do you think there are in this country? How many? What was it? A gazillion. Right, it's exactly that's the right number. Why is that important? Because you don't know what they're saying. We can't know what other people are saying, and they may be saying something completely different. I'm not talking about groups that are against us. I'm talking about animal groups. I had 2 case studies in this. I was involved in the 2 largest class action lawsuits in American history. And the plaintiff's lawyers on both of those were the lawyers that did the tobacco lawsuits. And I knew immediately that their strategy was going to be to get all the defendants saying something completely different, because that's how they work with the tobacco companies. They got them all. One company said nicotine's addictive, another one said it wasn't, and that's how they won the tobacco case. So one of the things I did was getting everybody that was involved in these lawsuits together and creating a council and creating messaging, and every week we met on the phone, and our lawyers were there, so everybody was saying the same thing about something critical, and that's one of the reasons the case went away. It's just something we have to deal with. You have to keep that in mind. But there's really good things about us, right? I mean, the history and science, you're seeing academic interest go from the actual wolves, but to the impact on the environment, the impact on the economy. There's a lot more being done. And as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't go against wolf karma no matter what. And I think that's something we have over everybody else. So let's talk about what advocacy. The difference between advocacy and fundraising and advocacy and lobbying is this. You're trying to create a permanent change in somebody's attitude and behavior. This is not writing a check once. This is not sending a letter in once. This is about really changing the way somebody perceives something. Several years, being the son of growing up in a police family, obviously I was raised to believe in the death penalty. But about 20 years ago, I was at an event where Mike Farrell, the actor from MASH, was speaking against the death penalty. And he brought facts and he brought information. And I took it and went, I got to rethink this whole thing. And so my attitude changed 180 because he was doing effective advocacy, enlightening me and getting me to understand that my behavior, my points of view would change. The campaign model is just something I want you to see because we talk about that here. Everything has to be a campaign. There are probably more than 5 truths, but these are the ones that I come up with. Anybody watch any of the films here or videos about watching any of the wolves hunt? What did you notice? There's a strategy, there's teamwork. They don't just sit there and go, well, we're gonna take this guy down. No, they really have teamwork, and everything you do has to have a strategic approach. Let me break these all down one by one. So before you're doing a campaign, and this doesn't require an enormous amount of effort, we're talking about a 1 or 2 page outline, but you start with your strategy. You gotta have your checklist to make sure you can go into something and you have the resources and the capabilities that you want. You also wanna have a timeline. How are you gonna measure it? So everything's gotta be this is no different than a business plan. Now, the objective is the critical component of your campaign. What is your objective? What are you trying to do? End all animal oppression or impressions. I don't know what that means. I don't know when it's gonna be accomplished. Slogans are not objectives, folks. Write that down. Slogans are not objectives, okay? Slogans are great for bringing awareness to everything, but they're not objectives. They're just because they don't say something that's important. On the other hand, here's an objective. It tells me exactly what they want to achieve. And that is what you want to have everything. What is it you're saying? Because all the people that were protesting about Wall Street, and I supported that, but God, everybody had the same reaction. What do they want? And nobody knew what they wanted. They were just angry. Part of it also is understanding that you're limiting yourself. Yes, we all want to stop global warming. Yes, we all want to stop oppression against animals, but we're not going to do that in one campaign. So don't look at the macro, figure out the micro. So we got rid of single-use plastic bags in California. We're going after other things. We're effective in that. We're doing things, but we're understanding that our role as advocates is figuring out what angle we can take on this to be part of the solution. Now, this is a critical thing. Can everybody read this out loud with me? 1, 2, 3. What do we need in order to get to where we want to be? You need to constantly be asking yourself that. No matter what it is, that's the thing. What's next? Where do I need to be? What do I need to do to get to where I need to be next? That's your measurement component. If you look at political parties, they have actually numerical identities, and they know exactly how many seats they need. They go into the states, they break it down by county, they break it down by individual precincts. You need to understand what is it we're measuring and what do we want to do. One of the misnomers here, and I understand it completely, is that what we're doing, no matter what we're doing in animal work, everybody's going to love it. Right? We hear these things that 90% of the people support the banning of this and that. That's great. But what we're doing in our campaign, we have to have a very finite audience. It's got to be really narrow, because without knowing your audience, you can't even begin to look at the messaging. An example about this is, the examples I'm going to give are from 3 parts of my career. One was in the field of developmental disabilities, which I spent much of the 80s doing. The other was in international war medicine for the State Department. And the last one I'll talk about, then there's LAPD, and then WellPoint, which was the biggest health insurer until it was bought by Anthem and threw me out of a job. So here, let me go back to the example. When I was at the police commission, and we're trying to reform the whole LAPD, I was hired after OJ and Rodney King and everything, and of course everything went well just because I was there. One of the things that came out of the Christopher Commission report about this was community policing, and it was a big buzzword. It still is a buzzword. So it was one of my jobs was to really push this community policing initiative. First audience identified were rank and file cops who are on patrol, who have to understand what it is and how to do it. And we were doing that. And I did these ride-alongs very frequently in late hours in very bad neighborhoods. And I'm with this sergeant who's 25 years on the job. And he starts bitching about community policing this. You guys want to change everything, blah, 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 blah. But I found that it's at 1 o'clock in the morning. We keep going past the same Chinese takeout place. Not a donut shop, so I have no idea what he's doing. And I said, why do you keep doing this? He goes, well, there's a lady in there, and then she closes up around 1, and I want all the gangs to know that I'm here and not to bother her. I said, that's community policing. So what that did is that identified a separate audience. The rank and file were one, but the old cops who didn't understand they had been doing this for a decade. And that created a second audience that I had to address. Now, we're going to talk about this a lot. If you don't know who you're against, there's no way you're going to win. Think of it as a political campaign. Think of it as no matter what you want. It could be multiple people. It could be dealing with a whole industry. You could be dealing with NRA. You could be dealing with people, landowners. You could be doing different people. But you need to understand them. And boy, you need to research them like crazy. Because once you do that, it gives you a benefit of understanding what likely they're going to be saying. And if they're going to be saying things, what's the one thing we heard common here was animal management, right? Or population management. We know that's crock, right? So that gives us the advantage of going, here's what we're going to be able to say. Anybody ever go into or watch a political candidate or something on one of the Sunday news shows, and they'll say, well, my opponent is going to say, boom, boom, boom. That is so effective because you're taking away the argument. Because now you say, my opponent's going to say, boom, 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 and I'm going to point out everything that's wrong with that argument. And unless you know what they're going to say, you can't do that. You got to shoot down their argument before they even have a chance to understand this. Why do I keep dropping this like I'm crazy or something? Anything else here? Voices. Okay. So, messaging. In 1992, Jim Carvell gave this idea to a young governor from Arkansas who had a lot of baggage. And the country was really struggling financially. And he said those 4 words, it's the economy, stupid. That not only got him elected, it changed the way the whole country looks at messaging. Something that succinct, something that really says exactly what it is what got him elected. And that's what people expect. There's been a lot of research on that quote and now how it impacts everybody. You got to keep it simple. And these are all the messaging issues. And you could add your own, but it's got to have these things in it. It's got to be compelling. It's got to be solution-based. We talk about this. This is effective messaging. And of course, number 3, God, please make it factual. Because, you hear so many, you hear the opposition doing so many lies. The minute you start saying something that's not true, your credibility is shot to pieces. So how do we create a message? Well, these are 5 ways that I've done this in my career. I'll go through them one by one. I hate statistics. I really do. I don't think that they're meaningful, with some exceptions. And here's one that's not. So last month, a study came out that said in 2018, more people died of opiate abuse than car crashes in this country. And I was like thinking, okay, I'm sure that's accurate, but is that because cars are safer? Is that because opiates are what they are? Or are they basically saying, if you're going to shoot up heroin, wear a seatbelt? It doesn't tell me anything. But here's something that does tell you something. So there I am doing war medicine. I had just finished the U.S. intervention in Somalia and Rwanda, which was going on still. Somalia was very easy to identify. It was the starving children. It was a horrible, horrible situation. And trust me, the photos you saw were not anything close to what the real photos looked like because they couldn't show those. Rwanda was about ethnic cleansing. Genocide became the issue. People understood what Rwanda was about. Angola, they say to me, Ken, you got to come up with something for Angola that we can all advocate for. What is it? Because I couldn't just say the war or anything like that. And I didn't know about Angola. I found out much later it's Portuguese. But what I did start reading about were these landmines. And back in the 80s, when the CIA and the KGB were kind of establishing their territory, they started planting landmines all over the country. And the landmines were still there. So I went to the UN and I found out what their estimates were. I confirmed that with a couple of them. We're doing with estimates only. And it was a lot. And then I took the square mileage that's involved the whole country of Angola. And then I got a calculator. I had to go buy a calculator for this. And I figured out that in the whole country of Angola, This room, you cannot go the size of a football field, 120 by 50. There's going to be a landmine in every part of the country. That's how many landmines there were. And that's the statistic that became effective. And that's what started the Ban the Landmines movement, that Annie Lennox was helping us out, and then Paul McCartney got involved, and it became all about landmines. But again, that had nothing necessarily to do with the war, but I was trying to advocate for something that was even bigger than that. And it has had an effect across the country and across the world. Emotion. This is something that with animals, obviously, you know, we use a lot, and I think it's wonderful, and it's great. I highly endorse it. When I was working in disabilities in the 80s, I'd done this public television series on it, with 2 series we did on public television. And so I started getting asked by writers and television networks when they were doing pieces on disabilities, you know, dramatic pieces. Would I be an advisor on Rain Man, on TV shows? And I did all that. And even, you know, NBC got, LA Law got, the character of Benny was a character who was identified as mentally retarded, even though the actor wasn't. Then there was a play called The Boys Next Door, which I worked on for a long time. And then when it came to New York, we had all these group homes in New York that we were fighting for. And I took the residents, each one, you know, house by house, to a performance. And it's about a group home. And so they were able to see it. And they got to meet the cast afterwards. And because the cast was always asked, whenever I was doing consulting for an actor, it was, well, what's a retarded person like? Tell me. I want to make sure I get it right. And I went, they're people. What's an actor like? They're annoying. They're desperate. You can't sit there and say, what's it like? So a couple of times when I brought some of the more higher functioning group homes there, they were interested in the play, but they couldn't understand why they were using real actors. And then somebody said, why not us? And that's what hit me, why not us? And so we put together an advocacy campaign. Because I had these connections to the theater, we got a bunch of people from the theater where I was working, this place I was working, and we started a theater group, an acting program. And this went on for a while. And that became his role in Life Goes On. I should answer, we got a head of one of the cable networks to really be our advocate and force the issue and get it in there. And Chris Burke got a full-time job on Life Goes On. And one of the great thrills of my career was being on the Warner Brothers lot, and he had his own parking space. And if you know Hollywood, that's the thing. You have your name. No, he doesn't have a car. He couldn't drive, but they gave him a parking space. And that was great. So the emotion came not because they're disabled, but because they wanted more. Oh, I love that one. Something with this a dire sense. This is something we're going to not do as much strategy as, but you got to attack it when it happens. And I give the Me Too movement all the credit in the world. They saw this opening with Weinstein, which most of us on the West Coast knew all about, but they took this opening and they ran with it. And they put all the resources immediately into it, and it's had a remarkable impact on the country. And it's just incredible, and I just think that they're amazing. They just understood, we got to take this thing. Fourth, okay, this is money. Money is different than statistics, folks. Money is dollars that's out of your pocket. So I was in Boston a couple years ago, and there's a wolf rescue place right outside of Boston that I went to. And I asked the guy, how many wolves are in the state and stuff like that, and he says, no, there's no wolves in Massachusetts, just in these rescue places. I said, there's no wolves? He goes, no, the state got rid of all the wolves in the wild. And I went back, came home, and I did some research on this, and it was true. And then something occurred to me. I went to the CDC website, and I punched this in. And there's an epidemic of Lyme disease at the time. I mean, massive epidemic, because the deer population exploded. And guess what the CDC predicted? That by the time they eradicate this whole thing and get it back to normal, as well as the medical cases, they're estimating it's going to cost taxpayers $1 billion. That's not a statistic, that's dollars, that's real money. Those things are there. I mean, I would say some of the things I've heard here, such creative thinking about things, using the gambling initiative, on the hunting, is just brilliant. We got to think those ways. We got to think outside the box. Finally, the piggyback. So this is the easiest one. I know a lot of people here do it, and it's great. and I heartily endorse it, because one of the things that's hard to do is establish your footprint. So, for example, in the killing contests, right, most people weren't even aware of them. Well, when you're piggybacking onto something that's already there, so it's the impact of wolves on the environment, now you've got an opportunity to put your agenda in there, create your mission, and your objective, and your advocacy campaign, but you're tying into something that people are already aware of. And that just makes it so much easier, and I've had so much success with this over the years. Creating something is really hard. Going back to what the slogans are. Yeah, the slogans are great if you're creating awareness, but if you want to get something done, you need to have a little bit more, and this is one way to start. Okay, I've talked about strategy. I'm going to keep saying the whole thing. There's got to be structure and discipline. It's got to run like a regular business operation. I know we're all volunteers, but we've got to have it run at least thinking that way. One of the most important things you can do is get third-party endorsements. And the reason is, and they just talked about this previously, nobody gives a crap what you and I think. But you heard me mention the CDC? There's my third-party endorsement. There's a credible source. You heard me mention the UN, and there's a third-party endorsement. You have to find people that are doing that have the information, that you're just repeating what they said. As I said, there's a lot more academic publications that are going on. Now, who makes the decision in whatever you're arguing? Could it be a panel? Could it be one person? You have to understand that. When I was at the police commission, my boss, the commissioner, Ray Fisher, was brilliant. I was very lucky to work with some really brilliant people. And somebody was pleading a case before the commission about something, and there was some lawyer standing there, and he's saying, and as Justice William Brennan wrote, and the Supreme Court Justice Brennan wrote in this decision, and he starts reading this off a page. And I'm in the back of the room just giggling, and Ray looks down at him and he goes, "That's not what Justice Brennan wrote." And the guy says, "I'm sorry, sir, it is." And Ray looks at him and he goes, "I was the law clerk for Brennan who wrote that. I know what he wrote." If this guy had taken 2 minutes to go on Ray's bio and find out he clerked for Brennan, he probably could have, well, the whole case was gone by then. He had no credibility whatsoever. You know, it's so critical to understand that. And knowing the opposition, people know what grassroots are. People know here what grass tops campaigns are? Hold your hands. Now, grass top campaign, it's not done all that often. It's basically when somebody is targeting a very specific group of people. This is big in the pharmaceutical industry. They're just targeting certain FDA panel people. They're targeting certain legislators that are involved in something. So they're only going for the top level. They're not really putting together anything for people. And it's very political and it works. And AstroTurf campaigns, you know what that is? You see a drug commercial on TV and it says, well, the Center for We're Against Brain Cancer thinks that this. These are all made up, okay? Every single one of these is made up. They don't exist, except on paper. And you can do your own, by the way. You can have your own AstroTurf. It's really easy. You just need a website. But so when you're looking at the opposition, and if there's an AstroTurf, you've got to point that out to people. You've got to tell people that doesn't exist. They just made that up. And everybody does that. I hate to say that, God. Take a break. Okay, here's a quiz. Everybody know the answer? And all the president's men, what advice did Deep Throat give Bob Woodward in the garage? Very good. If you don't follow the money, you don't belong in this room, okay? Because money drives everything, and I mean really everything. It is the most critical component you can do, is understanding where the money comes from. Who's backing whatever you're talking about? Who's supporting whatever you're talking about? When California has dozens of propositions on the ballot every year, the first thing I go to is I look up where the money's coming from, because that's going to tell me more about it than anything else. So understanding the money, doing the research, you can find out, for example, whatever person you're dealing with, you can find out online what federal election campaigns they've given money to. A lot of states like California also have it, but if you're giving money to a Congress campaign or a Senate campaign or the president, it's already online. California, all the state offices, it's online. That will tell you a lot of the money. I did this because I want you to see how important it is. So I made this pretty slide. Because it's true, folks, and when I see things that go on, and I look at stuff, and this whole thing with college football athletes, and I look at the fact that there was so much money. I I mean, did that strike people? Wasn't the fact of it, it was just how much money people were paying to get their kids into these colleges. And you're telling me USC didn't know about that? There's no way in the world I'm believing that. And that's one of the things I do, going back to the first slide, about looking at always looking at both sides of it. I read 4 or 5 newspapers, I scan 4 or 5 newspapers a day. And I'm always looking at, geez, they're really saying that? Boy, I would take that and tear it apart. Or they're saying this, and that is so much methinks thou dost protest too much. There's something behind that. Or the nonsense of, we can't comment on this because. And so if you can get to a point where if you can recognize the bullshit, you got a real shot at understanding what's going on. But you got to be able to recognize it. And the money is one of the ways you do that. Okay, how did the money thing play into this? When I was at WellPoint, we made a petition to move these 3 allergy medications from prescription to over-the-counter status. And there were 2 key points behind us. Number 1, the U.S. was the only country in the world that sold these by prescription. And number 2, the commercials, remember, for Claritin, stuff, it's safe as candy, it's safe as a placebo. Well, we thought, well, then why are people paying prescriptions for it? Well, a health insurer had never petitioned the FDA to move a drug, OTC, ever. It's always the drug companies that do that. So the petition started moving through the channels of the FDA. And I knew exactly where the money was going to come from on the other side. It was going to come from Big Pharma, and was going to probably come from a lot of AstroTurf campaigns. And I kept waiting and waiting, and nothing was happening until finally we got the final date for the final hearing at the FDA in Washington. And I was getting a little bit like, okay, we're waiting for the whole onslaught to happen. So I spoke to a reporter that was covering this, and I said, I've heard that they think this is a WellPoint money grab. So I planted that with him. And I said, have you heard that? He calls the pharmaceutical companies, and he calls me back and says, yep, that's what they think it is. It's just WellPoint trying to get rich, and WellPoint screwing this, and WellPoint screwing that. And that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because then I said to him, if this was a WellPoint money grab, how come every one of our competitors is going to benefit just as much as we are? It was not a money grab. And so I understood that the money was being the big issue here, but I also knew that Big Pharma makes a lot of mistakes. These are not the rocket scientists of the world that we think they are. They're in this for the money. But this was such a simple thing. Why did they contest it? Well, they did. Parenthetically, I was in, the week that was the hearing was in Washington, I was in Vancouver speaking at a conference, and I went down to the pharmacy, and I saw these boxes right on the front. They're a little different color, but the same product. So I bought a bunch of them. I put them in a FedEx box. I sent them to our Washington office. And during the hearing that day, commissioner said, well, we understand these are being sold everywhere. Oh, no, that's not true. That's just made up. And our guy pulls out the boxes. We just got these from Vancouver. Canada sells these things. So that's also, don't assume they're not going to do something stupid, particularly when it comes to people who really don't like animals. They're dealing from a point of emotion, not thinking. We've heard some incredible tactics. And I think what you people have done and what the speakers have done here is absolutely incredible. Like 4,000 feet, you get thirsty. I just want to say 2 things about this slide. You have this. Tactics are great, but they're tools. They're a toolbox. A tactic is not your campaign. I want to get 10,000 people on Facebook to like me. That's not a campaign. That's a tactic you use for your campaign. That's not an objective. That's part of the campaign. All these things are part of the campaign. They're all important, but don't make the mistake that you think that these are something that are that's it. If I get this done, it's going to happen. And on the social media, this is the challenge of social media, is you do get blowback real time as opposed to a letter to the editor. Understand that's going to happen. Understand that you don't want to get into a Twitter war, that they're going to say things that are horrible, and you're just going to have to stick to your guns. And we had a situation at WellPoint. I can't get into detail on it, but it was a really bad political decision our CEO made, which was done intentionally, as I found out later. And our general counsel told me about it, and I said, Tom, we're going to get hammered for this. We've never done this. We always talk how horrible it is. And he goes, your job is to play rope-a-dope. You know, rope-a-dope, remember from Ali? And he said, you're going to stand in the corner, and the media is going to beat the crap out of you, but only you. And you're going to take the punches because that's what we want to do. And sometimes that's what you do. You don't fight back. Let them exhaust their arguments, because at the end of the day, that's all they are, air. Oh, we're going to get into public officials now. So I've worked with public officials, elected officials at every level, and they're not nearly as dangerous as you think they are. They can be good people as well. But there are a couple of things you need to understand. That's the first one. Going back again to the protests, you got to get public opinion first before you go in there. No legislator is going to sit there and say, yeah, I'm going to write a bill now because I don't know anybody that supports it. They want to know what the impact is going to be. Get the awareness, get the public awareness around. And also, it's perception. Politicians are acutely aware of how things look, and they're acutely aware how they're going to be attacked for their decisions. So you have to always keep that in mind for them. Number 3 is, if you're meeting with a staff member of an official, and the staff member says to you, listen, I know my boss, I've been here 15 years, here's how you got to approach it, and you choose to ignore that, that'll be the end of your relationship with that office, and that will get around. They're there to help you. They're not there to screw with you necessarily, but listen to the advice they give you. It's really important. The legislative aides are good people. They understand what's going on. And obviously, compromise is something that I'm not a big fan of, but I do understand that it's something that should be part of my vocabulary one day. You know, and this is like, you know, as you can tell, I mean, I love animals, and I've been involved with wolves for years, but I love issues more than anything else, and I'm really passionate about this. And this is what I've done, and this is what my whole family's done. You know, my mother advocate, she created the first advocacy program for families who have people in long-term nursing facilities. This model is being used all across the country. So this is who we are. We kind of came up with this thing, but none of us like compromise. Understand number 5, that if you are an elected official, you need your job. Now, there are some people that are termed out. Those are great people to get. And by the way, anybody that works with celebrities, we didn't talk about that at all. I didn't have time for this. You know, I worked with a lot of sports celebrities, not some Hollywood celebrities, but mostly sports celebrities. And the best time to get a sports celebrity, and I'm sure the same is true of any other kind, is when they're near the end of their retirement or their final year. Because, God, they crave the attention they've had throughout their whole career. Now, all of a sudden, they've got time to get involved. And it is really, and they become really your great asset. But if you're going to work with an athlete that's during the season, and I've worked with a lot of them, including the world heavyweight champ, you've got to know what their schedule is, because their job is to perform. That's how they keep their money. The primary job of an elected official is to get elected. Number 6, enforcement provisions in legislation. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about that, but understand it is not a guarantee that there are enforcement provisions. And funding. I cannot tell you how many things I've worked on that bills were actually passed, but there was no funding attached to it. In late 80s, Congress passed creating the Office of Comprehensive School Health Education. They never gave dime one to it. But you got people running around the country back then, I voted for this, I supported this, but there was never any funding attached to it. There's a lot of bills like that. Always make sure you're aware of what that is. Now, Linda Parks is one of the best friends the environment and animal people will have in the world. She is my county supervisor. She represents Thousand Oaks, where I am. You probably saw her after the borderline shootout, and then 36 hours later, she was at every press conference with the fires, making sure that people knew where to get their animals to, and that the resources. And I asked her for quotes, and what she thought about, she would want me to tell people. She talks about research. I think what's even more important here is you want to appear reasonable and informed. What drives her crazy, because that was one of the questions I asked her, was people coming in making demands and not understanding, I'm one of 5 county supervisors. I can't part the waters. But she also told me something else that I didn't put on here. I said she's an environmentalist and loves animals. she has constituents that are duck hunters. And she explained to me, if it was not for these organized duck hunting groups around the country, our wetlands would be gone. They spend so much time and money protecting the wetlands. And she said, as a legislator, I need to recognize it. I may not agree with everything they're doing, but I understand that they have an important role. So you can't go into a legislator and say, I saw you voted for this, without understanding the bigger picture. Okay, this is the other part of the Ferber model, and the reason that all the knowledge I have about animals is this. So my brother, getting his ear bitten off here, is the national expert on animal cruelty. He started the first criminal prosecution unit specifically dedicated to just animal cruelty. He had, at one point, he had like something 25 or 30 police officers and prosecutors in LA. And that's all they've done. And he created a lot of the policies and the laws. He's retired now. And, but there's nobody that knows more about prosecution of people who commit animal cruelty than he does around the country. And he's on TV a lot and such. And he's really a resource to me because he explains to me a lot more in detail about the role of the prosecutor, which is something I'm going to think that nobody here is going to really have seen what we're going to see right now. Understanding what his role is and why it's important. So let's go to he's going to talk about first the role of the prosecutor in developing policy, and the second one is going to be the role of the prosecutor in enforcement. So can we start this now, please?
Animal advocacy, I see the prosecutor as having a dual role. But everybody knows the more traditional role, which is that a case comes into court and the prosecutor has to prove the case and tell the court why this person's guilty and then why they should be punished. That's a very important part. But what's left out of most advocacy efforts in this country is the beginning part. It's having the prosecutor part of a collaboration, being proactive in developing stronger laws and developing the ways that they're enforced. In simple words, it means that if a new law is being passed or laws are being toughened up, legislators and advocates can't do that without having prosecutors as part of that team effort. If you don't have the prosecutor as part of the team effort, your efforts can be wasted because the laws can look good. Even law enforcement can say these are worth enforcing, and then they get into the court, and what happens? The prosecutor says, this was done wrong, this is meaningless, it has loopholes, it's not gonna fly in court. And so all those efforts become a waste of time.
Those are so critical because Linda Parks actually spoke about that as well, that people come in and they want me to write a bill that I know is unconstitutional. And you know, one of the examples I've heard from my brother for years is people screaming, make that a felony, make it a felony. And he has to explain to people that there's something called the Eighth Amendment. And just because we make it a felony does not mean a judge is going to overrule it. Now, you have to look through the whole trail, and that's what he's saying. Look for the whole trail from the prosecutor all the way through to the judge. And then we'll get into appeals if that ever happens. Because my old boss, the police commissioner, is on the Ninth Circuit, and he deals with this. You have to remember, they can only do so much. Making something a felony is great. It doesn't give him any more ammunition. He had something, he had a judge who, for some reason or another, thought DUI was totally fine. And he would prosecute cases, and the judge would give no sentence, even to a second offender. So he had an idea. And one day, he had another cases when he was much younger, and 3 women came into the courtroom and sat in the back. And the bailiff comes over to the women and goes, who are you? What are you doing here? And my brother comes over, and he goes, they're with me. They're from Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Bailiff goes, runs into the judge's chambers. And no matter what, that guy was going to get sentenced, and he did. He got the maximum sentence. Why? Because he was able to say, you need to look at the whole picture. You can't count on a judge doing something when you go, this is wrong, you can't, and guess what? They can do it. Now, the next thing he's going to talk about is enforcement of law. About 4 or 5 years ago, California passed a bill which created special license plates for pets. Say we love our pets or something like that. And the $10, $15 thing you paid for these license plates was going to go into a fund that would support animal welfare. Well, the woman who pushed this bill through thought, well, I'm going to go up to Sacramento and find out how it's doing. So she goes up there and she finds out not one dime of those license plates that have been sold ever went anywhere except the general budget, because there was no tracking system put in place. There was no enforcement provision put in place. Just because you do something, don't assume that there's enforcement.
Animal advocacy, I see the prosecutor as having a dual role.
Oh, let's go next one. Try this one. Try this one, Angelo.
The reality in this country is that when a law is passed, people assume that it's going to be enforced. That couldn't be further from the truth. The police and law enforcement cannot be forced to enforce a law. So they need to be inspired. How do you inspire cops to care about a tough law on animal abuse? One of the key parts of that is the police have to believe that what they do is meaningful, and what it makes that meaningful is that the case, it's not just an investigation, it goes into a courtroom, and the DA is critical. So to get police to care about a law, you have to show that the DA cares about the law. And the DA, their job is to get the judges to care. But without the DA involved in this linear process of a law is passed, law enforcement enforces it, if you don't have a DA that then says, I'm going to take that case to court and let me fight with the judge. If you don't have the DA involved, the system falls apart, and all your efforts at advocacy are a waste of time.
This is what he does, and this is what he brought to LA, is making it clear that I've been in the environmental and they always have laws that aren't going to be enforced. And no matter how much you go roll call and you find it, roll call, they'll tell the cops. What percentage of a United States senator or congressperson spends of their time during the week raising money? What are your guesses? What? You're there. It's 40%. They have to spend 40% of their week fundraising. Now, congresspersons, obviously they run every 2 years. They have to constantly be fundraising. And even if they are running unopposed, they've got to be fundraising for two reasons. That money goes into their party's budget, or they're saving it for a bigger campaign that they want to do. In fact, Linda Parks, talking about somebody who's really ethical, I give her money every year, and I got a letter back saying, well, I'm running on, this is her last campaign, I'm running unopposed, this is my final campaign because I'm termed out, would you like me to return the money? Or I'll put it into a fund that I think supports the causes I believe in. She actually was offering a refund. They don't have to do that. And it's, so they're spending so much. So just understand that it is about the money. Knowing the laws, this is really critical. Before you attack legislation or ask for legislation, you got to dig deep and find out what laws are on the books. Because so many times you hear this phrase, if we would only enforce the laws that are already there, the problem would go away. That's true in many cases. There was a law, somebody was complaining about a guy riding a motorcycle with a dog in a basket in the back or something, and they found out, and people were trying to prosecute him. Well, they did the research, and that there was a law in California from 1924, and it dealt with the Model T Ford, and that what we would call a jump seat now, and there was a law that made it illegal to have an animal in that jump seat. And so they used that law, and they were able to prosecute this guy. So it's amazing what you'll find when you do the research, but don't assume that it's there without you spending time looking at it. Overshooting your target, what I mean by that is going back to I understand when you're in Montana, you probably know your representatives really well. But when you're in a bigger state, you're not going to go into your congressperson's office and say, I want to see him. You don't want to see him. You want to see his legislative aide. You want to see somebody who knows what's going on in the community. So don't overshoot that and make demands. The pressures of the office I said about fundraising. Feed the ego monster. When I first joined the police commission, we had a simple, stupid little thing we were approving. It was a park or a zone or something for crime. I don't remember. Well, we put it through just as a pro forma thing, and we got a call the next day from the woman who was the LA City Council Chair of Public Safety, who shot it down. And guess why she shot it down? Because we didn't make it the Laura Chick initiative to do this thing. And that's a true story, folks. So every time anything came up, we gave her credit no matter what it was, because they need to have that ego fed. And but on the other hand, there's good stuff about this. There are politicians and officials that are doing good work that, like Linda, that you love. Make sure they know that. Call their legislative people and say, we'd like to give her an award. We'd like to do something for them. We'd like to recognize that they're supporting us. That's really important to them. It does matter. When you're choosing your representative, okay, so this is about me. Can you imagine that? It's about me. When I was in New York in the 80s, and we were trying to open up these group homes, and this was really new stuff back then, and we had to go to the community boards and have tons of meetings, because our idea was to put the group homes in the most expensive neighborhoods. Why should they be in ghettos? They really were across the street from Barbara Walters and everybody like that. And there was always opposition. And I never went to one of those hearings, because when I was in high school, I volunteered at one of those institutions where those kids were chained to the bed. And I remembered those days, and I still remember them. And if I heard somebody shoot down this proposal, I would have killed them. And I know that about myself. I'm not good in those situations. So they knew where I worked, don't let Ferber go in there. You know, other things where I don't really have that kind of passion about it, but understand your representatives have to have a position where they represent themselves and represent your cause effectively. Oh God, they don't operate in a vacuum. That's so important. People forget that your elected officials, they know what's going on. So and I'm not saying anybody here would ever do that, but if you're bad-mouthing somebody or anything like that, it's gonna get back to them. So understand everything gets back to everybody, and just behave accordingly. And I know you do. Just a reminder. And what was that last one? What's those words? Follow the money. Yeah, we should do that. That's probably a good idea. News media. You know, this is something we're just going to touch on because I can do 12 hours on this with all the work I've done. You know, yeah, journalism, print is not there anymore, but e-news, there's so many good reporters that are out there. There's so many good young writers, and they're looking for stories. You've just got to really do the research to find people that would be interested and take a lot of rejections. Connect the dots is something that it took me years to remember this. I always give journalists the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to treat them like they're stupid. But I was told very clearly by my friend who covers the White House, we used to cover the White House for the New York Times, we have 12 stories going on in our head at once. You got to remind us what it is. Don't feel terrible about reminding them what your story is and what it's about. And again, just like everybody else, their job is to keep their job. It's so tenuous right now. How many people have lost their job in that field? Okay, what are the mistakes we make? People have heard of donor fatigue. When you keep asking people for money so much, they shut you down. The same thing is true in advocacy. You got to be careful how often you go to the well. And it's got to be something that you're going there with something that matters, where you have good research. And I know I use crying wolf, but don't, and I know to us, everything that's been said in this week here and everything that will be said, it's absolutely critical. But they are going to hear it as everything that we do has the most urgent matter, and therefore I can't even take their calls because it's going to be something urgent, and they don't deal with the realities of my world. And you got to manage that. You know, inciting violence, I mean, when I worked at St. Jude Children's Hospital, we had a lab that went through 20,000 mice a year because one of the arguments, you know, people would protest, and I said, well, the federal government, since pediatric brain tumors are almost always in infants and toddlers less than 2 years old, and for some reason the government doesn't allow us to experiment on these things. So we have to use the animals. Understand that that's just the way it is. You can't fight everything. They are doing research now on making it so you don't use animals, but this was back then. Making it personal. So you're going to be attacked, Your organization's going to be attacked. Your cause is going to be attacked. I've attacked this guy 5 times already since he's been here. Don't make it personal. Don't go back at them. You may say it is. Just understand it's not personal to go to the Godfather thing. It's just business. It's nothing personal. Godfather has so many great quotes. Remember he says, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That goes back to know your opposition. And this is the thing I was talking about earlier, the passion versus emotion. I'm generally not a huge fan of PETA's advertisements, but I think this is wonderful. This really hits home with this, and it's terrific. And I know what the message is that they're saying. And they bring it home in a way that is just sweet and understanding and really effective. When I see this, I don't know where this is from, but when I see this, I don't know what the message is. I'm not sure what they want me to do. You know, this thing, so here, I know what she wants me to do. I think it's great. But here, that's not working anymore. Those days are gone. It doesn't work. Summing up, these are all the things I talked about. But wait, there's more. One last slide, folks. From Apollo 13. If anybody has rocket scientists or engineers in their family like I do, they talk about this all day long, because this is exactly what rocket scientists talk about all day long. When they have a problem, work the problem. Don't make it more difficult. When they were doing the Apollo 13, he kept reminding them, don't tell us what we don't have, tell us how we can fix the problem. So just keep in mind that you want to have a certain zen about yourself of, let's work it, let's get it done, and it will work out for you. I just want to say one last thing, because I see that Betsy's in the room, and that, you know, what you've done something that I don't think anybody's ever done to me, which is to make me feel humbled. If you think I'm bad, you should meet my brother, trust me. The quality of speakers you've gotten, and the fact that I would even be included in this thing is such an honor, and I'm so thrilled. And I know next year, you know, you're just wonderful. This is the first time we've worked together, you know, and I would do anything for you or anybody else here. You have my email. I'll be around all weekend. And what I just did is, this is an example of me advocating to be invited back to speak next year. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
Can you trust the statistics of the World Wildlife Association?
Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to thank Ken. I think this is just like such a fantastic overview of effective advocacy. And explained in a really clear way, and with obviously lots of humor to keep us engaged. I want to like hit on a couple of your points that I find extremely important. You mentioned you needed to add the word compromise to your vocabulary. I think a lot of us don't want to compromise because we're so convicted in what we're doing. So it's really simple. Set your goals way beyond what you ever could achieve, and compromise back to where you want to be. So now you can safely add that word to your vocabulary. I want to suggest another word. So on the page where you list some tactics, your traditional tactics, rallies and protests. So in a very recent land conservation initiative in Prescott, we just got 1,000 people to City Hall to support a resolution that we brought to the City Council. But we hemmed and hawed for months over what to call it, because a rally and a protest makes you look radical. And so I want to add a word to our vocabulary, which is an assembly. Yeah, we called it a citizens' assembly, and then it really takes the edge off of it.
The one thing I would just say to that is, and I don't know the answer, first of all, what you guys do, I mean, this is the gold standard right here. With that presentation yesterday, that is everything I've said here and then some. But one of the challenges I would ask is that, how are the media, if you want media coverage of that, are they going to respond to something using those words? They want something, in LA, everything's got to be sensational and stuff. So that's my only question.
Yeah, sure. And so you got to get back to know your audience and know your political audience in the community you live in. This is in Prescott, a very conservative community. If we were doing this in Flagstaff, maybe we would have called it a rally. But so know that audience. So, those are 3 very good words, but know the audience. The last one, prosecutor supports your legislation. Our resolution failed 7-0, unanimously voted against it because the city attorney said that it was legally faulty. That was our fault. A lot of really experienced advocates and activists who did not vet our resolution with the city attorney. And so, yeah, that point right there is super essential for people to take with them.
Thank you. And when that happens, and it happens, you're going to be pissed. Because even if you do it in advance, even if you vet it in advance, and they say, this isn't going to fly. When at the police commission, we had one city attorney that was just dedicated to me and my staff. And he was a great guy. But he had been there 30-something years. When he said no, I just went, that's it. I'm not going to fight this because, first of all, it depends also knowing who they report to. At the time, the mayor of LA was Dick Reardon, a billionaire and a very powerful man. So if Reardon's not going to like it, I'm not going to do it either.
Great presentation. That was good. It's good to see you working with some ethical industries too. That was nice. Big tobacco and healthcare and LAPD back in the 90s.
Question. Let me respond to that. So I'm on a plane, and I'm working at WellPoint now. So I'm in first class, and guy comes walking down the aisle, and it's the former Inspector General of the LAPD. And we got along great. And I said hi to him, said, Jeff, I said, you're not going to believe what it's like at WellPoint. At WellPoint, and this is true, and I forgot to put this in here, everything I wrote, our lawyers made me footnote. And it couldn't be hearsay. It had to be actually published stuff. And I'm telling Jeff, I said, it's the most amazing place. They're so ethical. Everything's about the truth. And he looks at me and he goes, when you were at the police department, you and the truth were never even in the same room.
So I would just highlight kind of a combination of your ego, play to the people's ego, and social media. I think one of the most successful things people can do, which is very easy, is to follow reporters who you want to influence or follow people at industries and simply retweet their stuff and compliment them, or post it on LinkedIn and compliment them. And it is amazing how many relationships one can make with reporters simply by telling your followers that they're pretty good at what they do. And so I would use that as a very simple, inexpensive way of gaining influence.
Thank you. And it works everywhere. As I mentioned, I have a very close friend, Cheryl, who's at the New York Times. She covered the Obama administration for 8 years. She's now in charge of congressional coverage. So she's a real A-list reporter. But I will send her stuff on her articles all the time. And, boy, you really nailed this, or did you think of this? And it really works that way if you have that relationship. Here's what I think is important. And this is, I teach a class on managing your reputation online. And one of the things I tell people about anything having to do with your own reputation or interpersonal skills is you got to reveal something about yourself. You saw at the beginning of this. That stuff is true. I was raised in that family, and it was a tough. environment, but I was taught to see everything. And I tell that to reporters. I tell them why I'm involved. My brother talks about the things in his life that impacted him. And so it's exactly true. Don't be afraid to share things and develop a more deeper relationship than just an email relationship, which is tough because I go back to the days where you actually met reporters face to face. But do contact them. They love it.